and to be able to write to a file, and also to be able to read a file. Those are all basic operating system services. Okay, is that making any sense? Okay. So the interesting part is just about everything that an application needs for input and output must be requested. Nothing is granted, okay, to begin with. If an application needs to display something on the screen, okay, it has to request the GUI portion of an operating system to do it. An application has no direct control on the screen. It can only go through the operating system and say, hey, I want to display a red rectangle over here. And then the operating system, or the GUI part, the graphical user interface part of an operating system, would then decide, okay, is anyone else using that portion of the screen? Oh, okay, that's another thing on top of it. So it will just display in a window that is sitting behind what is actually currently active. So the operating system is doing all the management in this case. We illustrated this already. If an application needs to save a document to storage, it has to request the operating system to do it. If it needs more memory, it also has to request it from the memory. It cannot just say, hey, I can see you have 2 gigs of RAM sitting here that is nobody is using. I'll just go ahead and use those 2 gigs of RAM. It cannot do it that way. An operating system has to request resources from, an application has to request resources from an operating system first. And sometimes an operating system can say, I'm sorry, there's no more resources available, or you're not supposed to use up that much resources, so request denied. So that's why sometimes you see messages on the screen when application programs do not behave or you run out of resources. Are we doing okay so far with these concepts? I know I should have included pictures and stuff like that, but I'm not big on pictures. So, any questions at this point? No questions? Okay. It's kind of like, if you have big items to get rid of, you cannot just, kind of drive your truck to, an empty lot and just, chuck it off the bed of your truck and then drive away, You can do it, but you can get caught and get into trouble, right? It's the same thing here. Okay, you have to kind of follow the rules in many cases. So what if multiple applications request the same resource at exactly the same time? Because we know that we can run multiple programs at the same time. What if 2 applications decide to save files at exactly the same moment? Well, the nice thing is these requests will still have to be sequential from the perspective of the operating system. So, one application will actually make a request first, and then the second one will make the request next to it. As a result, the operating system can allocate storage resources to each application without any conflict. It will never allow applications to save files over or on top of each other. Are we doing okay so far?
So basically, new file for every time you save.
Every time
you save, there's going to be a new file. You just said that they would be able to save one on top of the other.
Every time you save, if you use the same name, you can overwrite a file. Okay, but if you use a different name, it will never overwrite the same file. There was a hand. Yeah, go ahead.
I was told that bad sectors are formed when 2 files are saved in the same physical hardware.
No, that's not. A bad sector is a hardware thing, because in the manufacturing process of a hard disk drive, occasionally, the surface of a platter may have defects. Okay, we are not really quite talking about hardware yet, but it's a hardware defect that marks a certain place on your hard drive unusable, and that's what we call a bad sector. Most of the time, bad sectors are automatically managed by the drive itself these days, so we don't even need to rely on software to manage that. All right, so this is how multiple applications can run concurrently, and multiple applications that run concurrently can render on the same physical monitor, like what we have here, in different windows. Because, let me see if I still have the application. Yes. So the application is still in the background here. You can see this cursor is blinking, okay? And that's because this application is in the foreground at this point. Yes, go ahead.
save something and then, do you have to add an extension .doc at the end to save it?
Most applications will append the extension automatically. If you're saving to a text file, it appends .txt automatically.
Some don't, though. They don't automatically.
Some do not, but in Windows, if you use Notepad, the .txt extension is automatic. Unless you change the filter to all files, then you can control the extension. Okay, so getting back to this example, you can see that this cursor is blinking here. Now, when I switch the application so my browser becomes my foreground, guess what? That cursor is still blinking. That window is still displaying the text that I typed, but it's not visible anymore because the operating system decides that, well, since the browser is the foreground application, it will display its own content on top of the other application, which is now sitting behind this particular window. Okay?
Is that because you're not using it like right this second?
Because it doesn't have the focus. Okay, in technical term, it's called a focus. You can only have one application with the focus at any particular time. So in this case, let me just resize this application here. Now, once I resize it, you can see that the other application is really still running. Okay, it's still really there. But once I lose the focus, you can see on the title bar, whichever application has the focus, has the title bar being black, and then the other one is grayed out. You can only have one application with the focus at any particular time.
Okay.
Now that's a very important concept because I only have one keyboard, right? I don't have one keyboard for the word processor, another keyboard for the browser, another keyboard for something else. I only have one keyboard. So the question is, when I type, which application is getting the keystrokes? Well, what do you think? At this point, my browser has the focus. So I can type whatever I type. Appears here because I just clicked that portion in the browser. You don't see the same thing appearing on my word processor because the word processor does not have the focus. So only the application with the focus will get the
So once
input.
you click on that, it'll have the focus.
Exactly. When I click it, it will now have the focus. So when I type, it will appear in the word processor. But this is the operating system working as well. Is it will help me direct the input from keyboards and other devices, and it will send that input to the right application depending on who has the focus. Yes, go ahead.
What about like on either television or on your phone, you can text and you can watch a video at the same time?
Right.
How is the focus if you're texting
Okay.
and you're
That's a good
or
question.
TV?
That's a good question. The question is, what happens when you watch, YouTube and try to work at the same time? Okay, which I do a lot. The answer is, the YouTube does not require the focus to show something. It's only the program that is accepting input, or you try to interact with, that needs the focus. So in that case, when you're trying to watch YouTube and work on site, as long as the YouTube windows is displayed and you resize everything else so that it shows, it does not require the focus. So the focus will go to the application where you are actually interacting with, like a word processor, a spreadsheet, or something else. Okay, that's a very good question. Yep.
So you say the application who has the lead of the keystroke is what?
With the focus.
Get the focus.
Right.
And how about when you just get like a YouTube and you can see that video, and after that you click and then it's the same video.
When you
but it's
click-
at the same time I'm playing together.
Okay, I can demonstrate it, right? Okay, so let me demonstrate that here. This is a command line interface. Most of you probably won't use one, anytime soon. And is not interactive. This one is interactive. It's actually, this one is reporting the screen recording part. So it's basically saying, how big is the file size at this point and how long it has been recording. So this is all ongoing and scrolling and stuff like that. But I can put the focus somewhere else because, this terminal does not require focus. All it's doing is to spew out, stuff and keep updating the screen, but I'm not interacting with it, except I might be glancing over and seeing what it's doing. But this part here is my browser now has the focus. So when I type something, it appears over here. When I click, here, I'm clicking inside this application, and that's why the mouse click is only interpreted by iceweasel, in this case, the browser, but no other application knows about, the mouse click. Is that okay so far? The concept of, the focus, okay?
Interaction.
Yeah, the focus is only needed when you need to interact with an application, but if all you're doing is just to read the output, or then you don't need the focus for that particular application. Like in this case, the one on the right-hand side that is still updating, it doesn't need the focus because I'm not trying to use the keyboard or the mouse on it. So it can just be doing its own thing in quote unquote in the background, and I can put the focus somewhere else where I'm actually doing some interaction. Now, who is managing all this stuff? Who's dealing with controlling which application has the focus and which application can show content where on the screen?
Operating system.
Yep, it is the operating system. Okay, so the operating system it has a very important role in a computer, because without an operating system, nothing would work. Now, an operating system manages resources directly. In other words, an operating system has direct access to some of the resources. And these resources would, let me just kind of read this part here. Now, these resources are usually considered core to a computer. In other words, it is not peripheral to a computer, it is core to a computer. It's not like, some computers may have this device. All computers must have these core resources. So let's go ahead and take a look at this part here. Processing resources refer to the availability of the processor to perform computations. That's a core resource of a computer. An operating system manages processing resources reasonably so that it is fair. Yep.
Does that mean when they say, oh, you need so much space to use this program?
That's the next one. That refers to RAM, which is a random access memory. When you say, how much space, that either refers to RAM, which is memory that you install in a computer, or it refers to storage, which is on the hard drive. So space space is ambiguous. You can refer to either one. Okay, we'll talk about hardware in the next topic, but in this portion, we are just kind of focusing on the software part.
My desktop has the OSC and OSD. What is the operating system, C drive, and the operating system name? How many operating systems you have in that desktop?
Most computers only have one operating system, because one is all that most people need. On my computers, I typically have 2 operating systems, and we'll talk about when we scroll down a little bit further, we can see whether there are alternatives of operating systems. So that's a good question. We'll try to answer that question a little bit later. Okay. So the first thing an operating system needs to do is to allocate resources in a fair manner. In other words, let's say you have a computational heavy type of application. Can someone tell me what kind of application may require a lot of processing resources? Go ahead.